Okay, I think I'm live. Let me just give a few seconds for some people to come inside. There was something that was wrong with this live stream in the beginning, so I'm not sure if everything's corrected now. But in any case, alright, there's still nobody in the chat and there's still nobody here. But in any case, let me just start off by announcing what we're going to be doing in this live stream. We're going to be exploring Saturn in the second house. Just checking my volume a little bit. Hi, DD. It is 8 o'clock where I'm from. So yeah, 8:30. And it is very, very hot. Hi, Blessed. How are you? Really excited to be here with you guys. I like to do my live streams earlier so I have time to do other things. But in any case, we're going to be exploring Saturn in the second house. But in any case, let us begin. So I'm going to be doing it the same way that I did it before. I'm going to be reading paragraphs, then commenting on what I read, and then checking the chat to see what you guys have to say. Saturn in the first house, DD, I already posted that to Patreon. I added more information, right? And Saturn in the second house, I'm also going to post this to Patreon as well with more things. Hi, Madeline. To cross the abyss, I don't know what you mean. But in any case, let us get started. So first and foremost, what you will find is that those who have Saturn in the first will to some extent relate to many of the observations here shared. Because for someone to have Saturn in the first, what it suggests is that the way that they approach each house in each aspect of their lives will carry the element of Saturn. And this is one of the reasons why planets placed in the first are so powerful. You understand that? Because you're taking that planet. When you have a planet in your first house, you're taking the energy of that planet into your attitude, into every aspect of your life, basically. So there's a small extent to which somebody with Saturn in the first may relate to Saturn in the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, etc., etc. All right, then. So starting off with a few very, very basic significations, at its worst, Saturn here suggests poverty, as Saturn itself is a planet of lack and a planet of poverty. And so one's family could have been poor in various ways, either financially poor or intellectually poor. One may not have come from a very educated family, but on a more positive side, one's family may have been very conservative regarding spending and may have limited the native in this respect. But in general, a Saturn like this would make one insecure about one's background in comparison to other people of the same social class. So that is a pretty common thing that you hear. It's pretty basic, straightforward signification. Obviously, it does not mean that all people with Saturn the second were going to be poor and things like that. But yeah, just to get that out of the way. You mean the Sephiroth of dots? Of dots is what you mean. I see. Okay. You're bringing in a little Hermetic Kabbalah into this conversation. I'm not sure how many people who are familiar with Jyotish are familiar with Hermetic Kabbalah. Some of you are probably confused. What the hell is Hermetic Kabbalah? Well, listen. It's a whole thing, all right? Hermetic Kabbalah is a whole thing. But hello to everybody here. Hello to Spexicles4502. All right, let's continue. One of the names of the second house is Kutumba, which means family, household, relations by descent. So one may actually feel distant from one's family. One may have grown up with a family, or one may have grown up without a family, without, or one may have been an orphan. But either way, there is a separation from the family, either physically or emotionally. Also note that Saturn's third aspect shines upon the fourth house, and so suggests a particular distance from one's mother as well. Saturn can deny the significations of a house so strongly that it literally pulls out the opposite significations. So if the second house represents family, Saturn in the second house can mean you grew up without a family. You grew up distant from a family. You grew up an orphan, Since the second house relates to one's culture, if Saturn is placed there, one could reject one's own culture so much that one develops a fascination for foreign cultures. One could be interested in foreign languages and foreign peoples while being ignorant of one's own family, traditions, and culture. One of the names of the second house is Kula, which means clan, tribe, race, flock, or herd. All right. So this, again, Saturn is also a planet of rejection, and so wherever it is placed, you may have a tendency to reject those themes, to reject those aspects. And so you could be somebody who, yes, once again, you do not like your own tradition, you do not like your own culture, etc. And even though Saturn itself is not a planet that relates to foreign lands and things like that, because Saturn can so deny the significations of the second house, which relate to tradition, one's own family history, because Saturn can so deny those significations, you could actually be somebody with a fascination for foreign things. You see, you could be somebody with a fascination for foreign things. This is actually very different from Mars, for example, because one of the names of Mars is clan. Mars is the defender of the clan. And so somebody who has Mars in the second house would have a lot of pride about their own family history and would always defend their own family history. But somebody with Saturn there would reject it. Space Chronicles. Okay, that's your name. Space Chronicles. I think so. Okay. So if you guys have any questions about this, about Saturn in the second, please share, and I will continue reading. So Saturn here can make an individual who is against one's own people, in a sense. One who is overly critical about one's own country and culture, and in the extremes, they may contemplate the failures of their own family and culture, so much that they wish they were born in a different family, different nationality, different tradition, and even a different ethnicity. One may look down upon one's traditions, one's culture, one's nationality, or one's ethnicity. One could have shame regarding all of these things. At the most extreme, Saturn here could produce a hatred of one's own parents. Again, for various reasons. Perhaps because their parents were too strict. Perhaps because their parents were absent, as Saturn may deny the presence of one's parents. Perhaps because one looks down upon one's own parents, their class or their economic status or nationality. That's the other thing. Saturn in the second house could also create revolutionaries, and rebels, people that are so critical about their own family traditions and things like that they wish to change it completely. That is the extent to which they are very, very critical about those things. Hi, Etha. So, all right, I want us to be interactive. So, like questions about Saturn in the second. I do have Saturn in the 12th house, which aspects the second house. And I have a difficult relationship with my paternal line of my family, since the 9th lord is also ruled by Saturn. We are distant. Very interesting. Very interesting. Sorry to hear that. I think that my groom has Saturn in the second. He loves foreign things. He doesn't know anything about our country. Very interesting, Blessed. Very interesting. All right, moving on. Next paragraph. So another basic interpretation is ignorance, because Saturn is quite literally the planet of ignorance. Quite literally, the native could be ignorant of one's own family background, one's own culture, etc. One may have grown up distant from one's family and for this reason doesn't know them, or one may not know one's family history. One may not speak one's native tongue, one's native language, and instead speak well and fluent foreign languages. Well, and fluent foreign languages. One may actually be obsessed with all things foreign because, again, Saturn could force such a rejection of one's own native background that it instead provokes a love for anything that is not of its background. One may be more familiar with of what life is like overseas. So, of many things that Saturn does is that it can make one very, very insecure about the house and sign that it's placed in, you know. And a lot of times when we are insecure, when we feel very badly about ourselves, what do? We aspire to other people's way of life. We look at somebody else. We imagine that the grass is greener somewhere else. We imagine that the grass is greener somewhere else, is what we do. Can you make money with displacement when you're consulting people with a wide perspective that also include their parents and family? I'm not sure if I understand this question, but yes, I mean, of course, you could also make money with displacements. Saturn in Pisces going into the second from my Aruda, the Aruda Lagna. Depending on the house system, I have it in the first, second, or third. No, Madeline, you have to do the whole sign thing, the Placidus thing. So, for example, let's just say, for example, you have a Taurus ascendant. If you have a Taurus ascendant and Gemini is the next sign, the Gemini becomes your second house. So, like, that is the system that we have to use. It is the simplest, most straightforward system, and it's the system that works, and it's the system that we use in Jyotish as well. I have Saturn in a second, and I feel like I just finished up my Saturn return in a country I am not from and returned to my home country. Okay, let me read this again. I have Saturn in the second, and I feel like I just finished up my Saturn return in a country I am not from and returned to my home country. Let me ask you something. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this name. Meili Duzuikan. How long have you been in this foreign country? I'm curious now. How long have you been in this foreign country? And immediately after your Saturn return, did you return to your home country? I'm curious about that. Yes, Space Chronicles. Saturn in the second can definitely learn how to accept its traditions and culture later in life with efforts, because Saturn does not give you anything without efforts, as we know. As we know. Where are we now? Okay. So, the opposite interpretation is also true. So you have to always remember that planets can give you, depending on the sign and things like that, they can give you multiple different interpretations and even opposite interpretations. The opposite interpretation is also true. One could be trapped in the second house. One could have grown up literally confined to one's culture and ignorant of cultures outside of one's own. So earlier we were saying that Saturn the second can make one ignorant of one's culture and instead fascinated with external cultures, right? Now we're saying that Saturn the second could also make you ignorant of other cultures outside of your own, but being forced to learn a lot about your own culture. One may only speak one's native tongue and be ignorant of foreign languages, and yet one may suffer from a deep desire to break free from one's culture. One may suffer from a deep desire to learn new languages, to travel outside of one's birth nation. But as one matures, one could develop confidence regarding one's background, but this only if one works on it. All right then, so since Saturn limits you, since Saturn confines you, something that Saturn does is that it provokes within an individual the desire to escape. So Saturn also has a little bit to do with escapism as well. Saturn also has a little bit to do with escapism. It's very interesting that one of the deities that controls Saturn, let me type over here. Because this is easier to see like this. All right then. So check this out. planetary energies operate differently in different planes, and in different planes they are called by different names and they're associated with different things. So for example, from a very, very material and terrestrial perspective, Saturn is the vulture because he rides the vulture. And so from a very terrestrial perspective, Saturn is a vulture. But from an astral perspective, Saturn is controlled by Prajapati. Can you see the name down here? See, Adi Devata, the mental, which is also the astral. Saturn is controlled by Prajapati. And in the celestial plane, which is the plane of the soul, Saturn is controlled by Yama. It is controlled by Yama. And Prajapati is the creator deity. Let me just type it over here. Prajapati. Prajapati is considered a form of Brahma. And Brahma, remember who Brahma is. Brahma is the imaginative deity. All of reality is a dream of Brahma. All of reality is the imagination of Brahma. Saturn can confine an individual so much that it produces within them the desire to escape. So they can either escape through drugs and alcohol, but they can also escape through the imagination. Even though Saturn specifically is not a planet that relates to the imagination, it can provoke those sort of escapist tendencies. And so, yes, Saturn can confine you so much in the second house that it can make you dream about what life would be like outside of one's own culture. Is there a remedy for this? There are remedies for it, but you just have to be a little bit careful with Saturn remedies. If you watch my first live on Saturn in the first house, I discuss a little bit about Saturn's remedies, but even here I discuss some of its remedies. I remember I wrote something down. Okay, now, where are we now? Where are we now? Okay, we're here. Where one experiences insecurity, one wishes to overcompensate. And so Saturn has a lot to do with overcompensation. Now, because many of these natives may start out in life with very little money or wealth, when they get older, they may overcompensate by becoming exhibitionistic, flaunting what little wealth they possess, and become obsessed with material goods as a trauma response. Because Saturn has some relationships with trauma because it relates to lack. But this ostentatious behavior may actually cost them their wealth, as Saturn is the natural enemy of pride, and so Saturn may decide to punish these individuals by humiliating them with poverty. One advice or remedy to anyone who has Saturn in the first is to never speak of money and to never share how much they make, because Saturn is strengthened through secrecy, mystery, and invisibility. This placement may cause poverty to those who talk too much, or especially who talk too much about money, and it may be especially punishing to those who behave in a prideful way. On a more positive side, many of these natives are actually, a lot of the times, many people who have Saturn in the first are actually very private and mysterious about their money. These are people who could hoard money and actually secretly live a life of wealth, but to the outside world, they may present themselves as more humble and as lacking. Yeah. That. It does affect diets. It does affect diet. I see what you wrote over here, Madeline, about Petrius being ruled by Rahu. That's a conversation for a different day. But Rahu also rules astral beings, and it's related to astral beings as well. And it's also related to ghosts as well. So there's that. So Saturn is a planet that is always looking for flaws. It is never satisfied and is always looking to correct flaws. Sometimes these may even be imaginary flaws. So Saturn in the first can also make somebody very preoccupied. So, excuse me, I didn't mean Saturn in the first. But also actually Saturn in the first can do this. So Saturn in the second can also make someone very preoccupied with surgical and non-surgical procedures. In general, it can make someone very vain. Vain in the sense of being overly preoccupied with one's face and appearance. One could have very elaborate skincare routines, be very preoccupied with such things as makeup, and again, be very concerned with surgical and non-surgical procedures. It's funny because we know based on the traditional significations that Saturn at its worst here can produce crooked teeth, badly formed jaws, lazy eyes, emaciation. But even within the natives that do not possess any of these flaws, they still imagine themselves as possessing them. But if Saturn is well placed, these individuals may eventually become very good looking in the geometric sense, because Saturn is a planet that starts off ignorance, but then blossoms into knowledge. It starts off low, but then becomes bright and shining through effort. But even one, what did I write here? But even one who arrives at a place of beauty, no matter how much other people compliment one would still regard oneself as far less attractive than one actually is. So do you understand this point? The insecurity that Saturn can produce here can be such that even when an individual is technically quite good looking, when they look in the mirror, they will over-focus on their flaws. That's what it does. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know. I remember that. I see that. All right, then. Where are we now? So, the second house is also called Vakstana, which means the house of speech. Oftentimes, there's something odd or different about the way that these individuals speak. They may speak with a drawl. Do you guys know what a drawl is? They may speak with a drawl. They may speak with a vocal fry. They may speak in a sort of languid or lazy way, but they often speak in a way that drags the vowels. There is often a vibrational quality to their voice, as if they are humming as they speak. Recall that Saturn is also related to the goddess that pacifies, this being goddess Bagalamukhi. And so this humming quality, this drawl, this vocal fry can a lot of times have a very soothing effect on others, as it is a voice that may lull others into a state of tranquility. Actually, everything that we've said about the voice also relates to natives who have Saturn in the first house. It also relates to those natives. When one studies the birth charts of Grammy-winning female pop stars, one finds that Saturn in the first is the most common Saturn position and one of the most important positions overall. Is the second house a shadow of the house, a shadow of the 12th house? In some interpretations, that is the case. The second house relates to the right eye, whereas the 12th house relates to the left eye. The third house is the right hand, whereas the 11th house is the left hand. See? So yeah. That is what it is. The fourth house is one's individual heart, but the 10th house is the heart of the collective, the respect of the collective. So, yeah. In a way, yeah. In a way, yes. What if Saturn is combust in the second house? That's an interesting interpretation. Saturn combusts, and so Saturn's capacity to restrict is affected. So Saturn is not going to be restricting you as much as it normally would, and so some things would be released. But we have to see that in context. Yes, the presence of the sun with Saturn changes a lot of things because those planets are enemies and they're inimical. But somebody who has Saturn conjunct Sun, that person could be very insecure. Especially if it's a man, they can be very insecure about their masculinity. Yeah, Saturn does not like pride. Wherever Saturn is sitting in, if you're prideful about those things, Saturn will humble you on purpose and it will embarrass you on purpose. So yeah, Saturn does not like pride. A placement like Saturn is in the second is too subtle for me to find consistent film examples. It's not like Sun, Moon, or Ascendant. So unfortunately, finding film examples like that, it's not going to be too easy. Absolutely, Space Chronicles. Saturn in the second can cause difficulties in speech, and they can require speech therapy as well. Absolutely. It could be a child that could take very long to speak, things like that, stuttering, things like that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let us continue. Where were we? This is probably going to be a short stream, depending on the questions that you guys have, because, yeah, we're probably not going to take too long. Because Saturn could overcompensate for what it lacks in any given house, in the second house, it may actually make a social climber. Saturn can make a social climber in the second house. Also in the 11th house, it can do this. Because one would look down upon one's own class and one's own background. This could provoke within one a strong desire to climb the social ladder, either through genuine effort or through simply pretending to be part of a higher class. One with this position, at its worst, could despise people of a lower class and wish to avoid them lest they be associated with such individuals and are subsequently brought down by them. Instead, such a Saturn would like to mingle with the elites in society to be better integrated with them. But this is a signification we see even more strongly with Rahu. All of these social climbing nakshatras are related to Rahu, but also Saturn, as all of the Chala nakshatras are also social climbing in nature, with the exception of Punarvasu. And all the Chala nakshatras are controlled by Rahu, but mostly related to Saturn. So do you know what the Chala nakshatras are? The Chala nakshatras are Punarvasu, Swati, Shravana, Dhanishta, and Shatabisha. All of these are Chala. They are movable. These Chala nakshatras are the most sociable. They're the most socially graceful. They're the people who they can meet somebody new for the first time and they can integrate themselves with that person. They can enter into a business room or into a networking space, and they can easily mingle and collect the numbers and collect the attention of the people around them. That is what Chala nakshatras are very, very good at doing. They're natural conversationalists, things like that. And they have a lot of social climbing tendencies. Shravana, Dhanishta, Shatabisha, and even Swati, but to a lesser extent, these nakshatras have very strong social climbing tendencies. And these nakshatras are strongly related to both Rahu and to Saturn. Yeah, Punarvasu is the exception. Punarvasu does not suffer from a lot of social climbing tendencies, but it's also very conversational and naturally charismatic. Wow, you have all of that energy. You have all of that energy in the second house. Oh, that's wow. That is wow. Saturn exalts in Libra. Saturn opposite Moon, that's also not a very good placement because that suggests that you were not properly nurtured by your mother. Your mother was distant. Basically, a lot of issues with mother. Saturn can cause sleep paralysis, but if it's related to the 12th house in some way, and also if it's in the first house, even if it's in the first house, it can cause sleep paralysis. Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. You're in school to become a speech language pathologist. Speech language pathologist. So does that mean the disease of speech? I've never heard of a speech language pathologist. What is this exactly? A speech language pathologist, also known as a speech therapist, is a professional who assesses, diagnoses, and treats a wide range of communication and swallowing disorders in people of all ages. Okay, very interesting. Never heard of that. Yes, absolutely. It aspects all of those houses. This is actually for Vedic astrology, but listen, since we're talking about houses and not signs, you can apply it to tropical as well, you know. But now let us move on. So, did you know that the wife of Saturn is said to be Jyeshta, but spelled in a feminine way with this long A over here? The wife of Saturn is said to be Jyeshta, as one of the names of Saturn is united with his wife Jyeshta. And so there are also themes of jealousy with Saturn, because Saturn is a planet of lack, and jealousy is an emotion that is based on a feeling of lack. So Saturn is related to jealousy, but Rahu is also related to jealousy. See, because Rahu is the covetous planet. You can see that there are some similarities between Saturn and Rahu. Such natives could suffer from a lot of envy of other people who they perceive to be better off than them. And this again may fuel a resentment of their own background. As they get older, they may aspire to great wealth and great power as a means of healing that wound of feeling inferior to others. But no matter how much they accumulate, they never actually heal that side of themselves, because ultimately, Saturn is not a planet of accumulation and materialism, but indeed a planet of letting go and renunciation. One may live a life of forever being frustrated that no matter how much money and power they have, they remain covetous, envious, and continuously with a feeling of inferiority. Again, this is related to Saturn's relationship to Jyeshta, because Jyeshta is that nakshatra that is never satisfied. Jyeshta is never satisfied, right? No matter how much it accumulates, you know. And so Saturn being related to Jyeshta here, no matter how much money and power you have, no matter how beautiful you are, no matter how much all of the significations of the second house you have, you never feel satisfied. You still remain jealous. You still feel dry. You still feel inferior. It's only the day that you realize that, you know what? None of these things will ever truly make me happy. And the day that you let go of those things, that you can finally feel good about yourself. Because those things never truly produce long-lasting confidence. They do not produce long-lasting confidence. Yes, Space Chronicles, Saturn in the second could definitely cause a lack of proper nourishment in the childhood. Which me, you're asking, is there a list of signs or nakshatras where the placement of Saturn is labeled best to worse? Like a sliding scale. Well, I'm not sure about sliding scale, but we can do a little something here. Because Saturn is best positioned when it's in its own sign and friendly signs and things like that. So the best placements for Saturn are, Libra, Capricorn, Aquarius, and then comes its friendly signs, but starting with Venus's signs. We already did Libra, so now Taurus, because Saturn first likes its own signs, but then Venus and Saturn are best friends with each other, and so it likes Taurus. And then Saturn likes Mercury, but Mercury is indifferent to Saturn. And so after that, it is Virgo and Gemini, and these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, then. So now its worst signs for Saturn are its debilitation, which is, where is Saturn debilitated again? Aries. Debilitated in Aries. And then after Aries would be Leo, because Sun and Saturn hate each other, both. Then after this, where would that be? Scorpio, because Saturn hates Mars. Mars is indifferent to Saturn. And then after that, Cancer, because Saturn hates Moon. And then after that is Pisces and Sagittarius, because Saturn and Jupiter are indifferent to each other. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 signs. And then nakshatras, well, you just have to see the nakshatras here and the nakshatras here. Basically, that's what you'd have to see. I've actually never heard the term that Rahu is the shadow of Saturn. I've never heard that. But of course, I've heard, and one reads that the nodes, Ketu is most like Mars and Rahu is most like Saturn. Your mom is a Jayashta blessed? Interesting. Yeah, definitely. Somebody with Saturn in the second could be overly preoccupied with their food, overly preoccupied with what they put in their mouth. Yes, of course, disordered eating, or they could actually eat too much. You want to know why? Because Saturn is a Vata planet and it's related to anxiety. Saturn is a Vata planet and it's related to anxiety. And actually, we could have a little bit of a conversation of Ayurveda and the doshas. So we all know the Ayurvedic doshas, right? Do we know the doshas? There's Pitta, there's Vata, there is Kapha, right? There's Pitta, there's Vata, and then there's Kapha. This image is way too small. So Vata is ruled by the air element, Pitta is ruled by the fire element, and Kapha is earth and water. It is earth and water. Stereotypically, people who are Vata are very, very skinny. People who are Pitta are relatively muscular, and people who are Kapha are thicker. That is the stereotype, but that is not perfectly the case. You want to know why? Here is why. Because here's the thing about a Kapha body. A Kapha body puts on weight evenly. So whether a Kapha person is a little bit fatter or a little bit thinner, their body always carries weight in an even way. Weight is always evenly distributed. Let me think of somebody who could possibly have a Kapha body. Let me think of somebody who could possibly have a Kapha body. My mind is spinning. So there's Queen Latifah, for example. Queen Latifah. She's somebody who weight is evenly distributed in her body. You know what I mean? No part of her body is too much bigger than the other part. Weight is just evenly distributed, right? Let me think of somebody else who has weight that is evenly distributed in their body. Let me think of somebody else. Okay, I can't think of anybody else right now. But now let me tell you something else. Each of the doshas can be obese and can be overweight. When people think of fatness, they think of the Kapha dosha, but no, even Pitta can be fat, even Vata can be fat, but when they're fat in their own specific way. Let us look at Gerard Depardieu and his body. So, Gerard Depardieu, when he was younger, he was more slender, basically. But now look at his body when he became older. So what is the Vata body when Vata is overweight? Whereas Kapha puts on weight evenly, and so it is evenly distributed throughout his body. Vata is disproportionate. And so what does this mean? Some parts of Vata's body are way too big, and the other parts are way too small when Vata puts on weight. So this is an example of a Vata body. But here's another example of a Vata body. Let me think. Let's look at Kim Kardashian's body. Yes, I know that she's had a lot of plastic surgery, but like, bear with me. Let us pretend like her body is natural just for like 2 seconds. I know it's not natural, but let's pretend like it is, just for the sake of this example. This is another example of a body that's of fat that is not evenly distributed, because some parts of the body are a lot bigger than the other parts. You see what I mean? But that's not always necessarily a bad thing, because of course there are many cultures where they like it when their women have a have hips that are really wide, and you know, I'm trying so I'm really trying to be respectful with my language so I don't just like start speaking anyhow. Um, Basically, there are cultures that really enjoy an hourglass figure. Really enjoy an hourglass figure. These bodies aren't even as hourglass as I would like to show you. Okay, like a body like this, for example. There are cultures that really enjoy an hourglass figure, but guess what? This body is also very vata, because notice that some parts are a lot wider than the other parts. This is also an example of a vata body. So here's something that Saturn does. Saturn can make somebody, let's say you have Saturn in the first house. Saturn can make somebody skinny. It can make somebody skinny, but it can also give somebody an hourglass figure. It can be one of the planets that contribute to this, because vata is disproportionate. You know what I mean? It is fat that is distributed in a disproportionate way. Not that she does not look perfectly beautiful, you know what I mean? Some parts are bigger than others. She looks perfectly fine. But there is a disproportionality there in a sense. Because if this person were purely kapha or even pita, her hips would not be this wide. They would be smaller, you know, because everything would be more evenly distributed. Reading the chat right now. So what's that in a second? Okay. You have to read the Navagraha Puranas. Saturn is the son of the sun, so they have that is against each other. Sun is also the planet of light. Saturn is a planet of darkness, so they have that against each other. You have to read the Puranas. Download the Navagraha Puranas. The Navagraha Puranas. Download that. This is basically the story of the planets. It tells you the story of the planets and the archetypes and things like that. It'll be good for you. Princess Diana, Saturn in the second. Did she have Saturn in the second? Let's check this out. Princess Diana. Princess Diana. Princess Diana. Oh, well. Let's see. If. Oh no. Look, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and so Saturn is down here. So no, Princess Diana did not have Saturn in the second. Oh, you guys are looking at those examples of Vata and Kapha. Jack Black, Anna Nicole. Anna Nicole was probably a Vata Kapha as well. She was probably Vata. Oh wow, you had all of this, Marcus Johnson. That's very interesting. And you also have Saturn the second, Marcus. Interesting. Yes, Jayasha and Ashwini are Vata Nakshatras. Oh, very interesting, Sandwich. Very interesting. Tyla's body looks like a Vata Pita to me. Tyla's body looks like a Vata Pita. I want to check Tyla's birth chart and see if we can make sense of that. Because Tyla's body definitely looks like a Vata Pita. Okay, so Shravana is Kapha, isn't it? Okay, Maga is Pita. Maga is Pita. Shravana, I forgot what that is. Let me check that out right now. And then the Lord is here in Rohini. Rohini is Kapha. No, Shravana is Vata. So Nakshatra Dosha. It should be here online somewhere. Or maybe I have this information saved somewhere in my computer. Do I have it here in my computer? Do I have it here in my computer? Okay, I have it here in my computer. Shravana is the second movable nakshatra. No, it's not this one. Shravana is here. Shravana is a Kapha nakshatra. Shravana is a Kapha nakshatra. You guys are probably confused by my documents. Look at my document right here. So Shravana, right? The 22nd nakshatra. This 22nd nakshatra, and it's right here. It's right here. It is Kapha. So Tyla is a Pitta Kapha, but we don't know her ascendant and things like that, so we don't know. And also Venus conjunct Sun, that could contribute to Kaphaness. A lot of times you'll find that people that are stereotypically, they're usually considered attractive, they have some Kapha in them because Kaphana makes things soft. And especially when we speak of female beauty, people think of softness. All right, let me go back. No, Kapha is not Sattva. Those are gunas. Gunas is a different concepts. Gunas are a different concept. Tamo guna, Sattva guna, Raja guna. Those are different concepts than the Ayurvedic doshas. Let us go back. Where were we? Okay, so we're here. Unfortunately, another negative element of this placement is quite literally ignorance, as Saturn here can make the mind slow to absorb new information and can make a native less knowledgeable in general than the average person. Saturn here could literally place a veil over one's eyes, and at its worst, this is one position that could lower one's intelligence overall. It could even make someone airheaded. But Saturn at its best here could make the individual ignorant of most things, yes, but also deeply knowledgeable about a very specific field of knowledge. Like, for instance, one with this position could be ignorant about street names in one city or different politicians and celebrities, but then be deeply knowledgeable about one field like physics or statistics or even astrology. Saturn is also a research-oriented planet, as its vehicle is the vulture, and the vulture is the animal that contemplates all that remains and all that is left behind. And so when Saturn is well placed, it can make someone who is actually quite ignorant of many things, but is deeply researched in a singular field of interest. And to end this section that is going to be uploaded on YouTube, but there's more on Patreon, to end, now the second house is a death-causing house, just like the seventh. The eighth is a house of transformation, and the 12th of passing away. But funny enough, even though Saturn himself is a planet of death, this combination does not kill a native. It actually blesses the native with longevity. The second house is more so related to death through overindulgence. But that is an oversimplistic way of looking at it. Saturn in the second can also curse somebody with an early death, actually. But at its best, it can give somebody a long, long life. Let me just write that here. And what is it that... the whole body. But at its best, it blesses with longevity. All right then. So now let us read the remaining comments and any questions that are left. Saturn in the second D1, Moon K2 in the second. Retrograde Saturn in the second. Retrogrades are still something that I'm personally studying because it's something that I really want to understand better. But it is often said of retrogrades that A, it makes a planet brighter, and brighter is generally speaking a good thing because planets love lights. Light does good to a planet. Planets love lights. And so it makes them stronger and healthier and happier. And what I understand from retrogrades, the basic things that people say is that it internalizes things. And so, yeah, presumably it should be a good placement. But like I said, it's still something that I'm studying. Thank you guys for participating in this live stream with me. Thank you guys so much. But I guess this is the end. And I guess we're going to be waiting for Saturn in the third. And then in a future date, I want to talk about Saturn returns as well, because that is also a very interesting conversation. Because you see, with time, planets change. Planets act one way at a certain phase of our lives, but then are constantly changing. Constantly changing. And so we need to also have a conversation about that, how Saturn operates when we're children, how Saturn operates when we're adults, the differences. Thank you, Blessed, for your well wishes, for your prayers. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And so I guess we can end this stream. Thank you guys so much for participating.